Imagine being told by a government doctor that you are receiving treatment for bad blood. Imagine trusting that doctor completely, because why wouldn't you? He has come to your community, your church, your home. He has offered you something almost no one in Macon County, Alabama, has ever offered a black sharecropper in 1932. Medical attention, care, dignity. Now imagine that for the next 40 years that doctor never treated you at all. What happened in Macon County is not a story most people learn in school. It is not the kind of chapter that fits neatly into a textbook. It is the story of 399 black men who were enrolled in a federal medical study, watched as their bodies deteriorated, and denied a cure, even after one existed, because the United States government decided that their suffering was more scientifically valuable than their lives. This is the Tuskegee syphilis study. And once you understand what truly happened here, you will never look at American medical history the same way again. To understand how something like this was possible, you have to understand where it happened and when. Macon County, Alabama, in the early 1930s, was one of the poorest regions in the United States. The Great Depression had collapsed the cotton economy that black sharecroppers depended on. Poverty was not just widespread, it was total. Medical care for black residents was almost non-existent. Most had never seen a doctor. Many would live and die without ever receiving a single professional examination. It was into this world that the United States Public Health Service arrived. In 1929, a philanthropic organization called the Julius Rosenwald Fund partnered with the USPHS to survey syphilis rates in the rural South. What they found in Macon County alarmed them. Syphilis infection rates among black residents were extraordinarily high. Some estimates placed the rate above 35% in certain areas. The original plan was to study the disease and then treat it. Funding would come from the Rosenwald Fund, treatment would follow, and the project would serve as a model for public health intervention in underserved communities. Then the Great Depression deepened. The Rosenwald Fund withdrew its support, the treatment component collapsed. But the researchers were not willing to walk away entirely. What they had found in Macon County was, from a purely clinical standpoint, an extraordinary opportunity. Here was a large, isolated population with high rates of untreated syphilis, a population that had almost no prior access to medical care, and therefore no prior medical records to complicate the data. And so, the mission quietly changed. Rather than treating syphilis, the Public Health Service would study it. Specifically, they wanted to document what syphilis did to the human body when left completely untreated, from infection to death. What followed was one of the most sustained betrayals in the history of American medicine. The study was launched in 1932 under the direction of Dr. Taliaferro Clark of the USPHS. It was formally titled Tuskegee Study of Untreated Syphilis in the Negro Male. It was designed to last 6 to 8 months. It would ultimately continue for 40 years. The men recruited into the study were not told they had syphilis. They were told they had bad blood, a local term that described a broad range of ailments, from fatigue to anemia to general illness. They were told the government was offering free treatment, and to men who had never in their lives received medical care, who lived in poverty so deep that the promise of a free meal on examination day felt like extraordinary generosity, the offer was almost impossible to refuse. The researchers were careful and deliberate in how they built trust. They partnered with Tuskegee Institute, one of the most respected black educational institutions in the country, lending the project an air of credibility within the community. They recruited a black nurse named Eunice Rivers, who would become the human face of the study for the men enrolled in it. Nurse Rivers visited participants at their homes. She drove them to appointments. She was their connection to the program, and her presence, a woman who looked like them, who knew their families, who had earned their trust, was essential to keeping them enrolled year after year. What the men did not know was that the free treatment they believed they were receiving was, in most cases, not treatment at all. They were given aspirin, vitamins, iron supplements. They received spinal taps that were described to them as special free treatment. In reality, those painful procedures were diagnostic tools, ways of collecting data on the neurological damage syphilis was causing. The men were not patients being healed, they were subjects being observed. As the 1930s, gave way to the 1940s, the original short-term study continued with almost no internal resistance. Participants were actively prevented from receiving treatment elsewhere. When local draft boards began screening men for syphilis during World War II and ordering infected individuals to receive treatment, the USPHS intervened, contacting draft boards directly to ensure that the Tuskegee study participants were excluded from the treatment requirement. Men who might otherwise have been cured were deliberately shielded from that cure so the study could continue. Then came 1947, and with it, a development that would make the moral failure of Tuskegee impossible to excuse. Penicillin had been confirmed as a safe and highly effective treatment for syphilis. Within a few years, it became the standard of care across the United States. For most Americans infected with syphilis, the disease was now curable with a simple course of antibiotics. The suffering that syphilis caused, the lesions, the cardiovascular damage, the neurological deterioration, the blindness, the slow destruction of the body over years and decades, all of it was now preventable. The Tuskegee study participants were never offered penicillin. The researchers had originally justified the study by arguing that no standard treatment existed and that the natural progression of untreated syphilis was poorly understood. Now, there was a treatment. The justification was gone. And still, the study continued. The participants, who were aging, many of them now suffering the advanced consequences of a disease they had been allowed to destroy their bodies, continued to be observed, monitored, and denied. Think for a moment about what that means. These men had families. They had wives who in some cases contracted syphilis from them. They had children. They had trusted a government program for over a decade, showing up faithfully, year after year, accepting what they were told was treatment, believing they were being cared for. The study did not collapse from within. There was no collective moral awakening among the researchers, no official review, no whistleblower from inside the senior ranks of the Public Health Service. What eventually brought the Tuskegee study to public light was one man, working largely alone, driven by a conscience that could no longer stay quiet. Peter Buxton was a young venereal disease investigator who joined the USPHS in 1966. When he learned the details of the Tuskegee study, he was deeply troubled. He raised concerns formally in 1966 and again in 1968, writing memos to superiors that argued the study was ethically indefensible. Each time, his objections were dismissed. The study was reviewed by a panel that recommended it continue. Buxton did not stop. In 1972, he passed documents about the study to journalist John Heller of the Associated Press. On July 25, 1972, Heller's story appeared in newspapers across the country. The public reaction was immediate and explosive. The revelation that the federal government had, for 40 years, enrolled black men in a medical experiment, lied to them about their condition, withheld treatment, and watched them die, all in the name of scientific data, produced a wave of outrage that forced the study to an immediate end. A government advisory panel convened and concluded that the study was ethically unjustified. The experiment was terminated in November 1972. By then, at least 28 of the original participants had died directly from syphilis. At least 100 more died from related complications. 40 wives had been infected. 19 children had been born with congenital syphilis. In 1973, Senator Edward Kennedy held congressional hearings that led directly to the National Research Act of 1974. A class action lawsuit on behalf of the survivors and their families was settled in 1974 for $10 million. In 1997, President Bill Clinton issued a formal apology on behalf of the United States government to the surviving participants and their families. 8 men were still alive to hear it. The last survivor of the Tuskegee syphilis study died in 2004. What remains after all of it, after the apology, after the settlement, after the reforms, is something that cannot be undone. There were men in Macon County, Alabama, who spent their entire adult lives believing they were being cared for by their government. Men who showed up faithfully, year after year, who brought their trust to every appointment and received deception in return. Men whose bodies were studied rather than healed, whose suffering was documented rather than relieved, who died without ever being told the truth about what had been done to them. The Tuskegee study is not simply a story about a flawed research protocol or a failure of oversight. It is the story of what becomes possible when the people with power decide that certain lives are less valuable than data. It is the story of trust systematically exploited, of science stripped of conscience, of a government institution looking into the faces of its most vulnerable citizens and choosing, for 40 years, to look away. The men of Macon County deserved better. They deserved the truth. They deserved the cure. They deserved, at the very minimum, to be told what was happening to their own bodies. They were given none of it, and that is why, more than half a century after it began, the name Tuskegee still carries the weight that it does, not as a historical footnote, but as a wound, one that was entirely, inexcusably, deliberately made